The Cathari Coalition had seen many things across the galaxy, but nothing about the incoming ship seemed unusual at first. It was small, almost too small for long-distance travel. Its metallic surface looked worn, scratched by countless journeys, and it gave off the faintest energy signature the sensors could read. If anything, the ship seemed underpowered, almost outdated. To the Cathari, who spent centuries perfecting stable and gentle technology, this little craft appeared almost fragile. Inside the Coalition Observatory, a group of analysts watched the ship's slow approach. They sat in soft, cushioned seats designed for long hours of peaceful work. Their screens showed the same repeating information. A small vessel. Light crew, simple engines. Nothing dangerous. Nothing threatening. Just another visitor passing through their region of space. Most of the team believed the incoming species was simply looking for trade or navigation help. Maybe they were curious. Explorers. Maybe they were lost. The Cathari had met hundreds of harmless travelers over the last few centuries. This new ship fit perfectly into that category, or so they thought. One of the analysts, an older Cathari with shimmering blue scales, leaned closer to the screen. "Their ship's structure is strange," they muttered softly. "It looks like it wasn't built for comfort, more like endurance." Another analyst shrugged, scrolling through sensor data with a relaxed gesture. "Probably a minor species. Nothing complex. Look at that metal layering. It's uneven. Who builds a ship like that?" The Cathari were known for their peaceful, calm nature. Their entire civilization was built on cooperation, soft diplomacy, and gentle exploration. They avoided conflict whenever possible and believed every species deserved kindness first. Even after millennia of interstellar history, they still welcomed strangers with open arms. But the unknown craft approaching them created a small ripple of curiosity. Not fear, just curiosity. It wasn't that the ship seemed dangerous. It was simply unusual in a way the Cathari couldn't quite explain. As the vessel came closer, their sensors finally picked up signs of life. The readings made the analysts pause. The life forms inside were extremely dense, physically stronger than most known species. Their heart rates were steady, but unusually powerful. Their bodies gave off more heat than expected. Everything about them suggested toughness, almost unnatural toughness. But the Cathari didn't jump to conclusions. Tough didn't mean dangerous. It might simply be a species adapted to colder climates. It might mean they were large herbivores. It might mean anything. They tried not to imagine the worst. Still, whispers began spreading through the observatory. What? If they're one of those old rumored species? Which one? You know, the ones from the heavy planets. Oh, those silly stories? The Cathari had heard of Deathworld species, only through old tales passed from traveler to traveler. Stories told half seriously, half jokingly. Creatures that grew up on planets full of storms, wild terrain, and dangerous wildlife. Planets so unstable and unpredictable that the idea of intelligent life evolving there seemed impossible. But these were just stories, nothing the Cathari had personally witnessed. In all their peaceful history, they had never met a species from such an extreme world. So they dismissed the idea. The ship slowed and moved into a stable approach pattern. Small. Blue lights flashed along its underside, clearly a docking request. The Cathari responded politely, sending a warm welcome message filled with friendly greetings. They prepared the receiving bay with low gravity, comfortable temperature, and soft lighting. They wanted every visitor to feel safe and accepted. A younger analyst looked at the approaching ship with excitement. "I wonder what they look like," they said. "Maybe they're tall and gentle. Or maybe they have wings." Another smiled. "Maybe they sing their greetings." The Cathari often imagined visitors as gentle beings like themselves. It was simply in their nature. As the ship rotated into docking position, a light hum vibrated. To the station, everything was calm. Everything was peaceful. Everything was ordinary. But deep down, something about the readings still bothered the older analyst. They tapped a few keys, pulling up environmental scans of the visitors. Homeworld. The computer struggled to translate the data. The numbers didn't make sense. The gravity was too high. The atmospheric mix too harsh. The ecosystems too aggressive. It was nothing like the stable, quiet planets the Cathari considered normal. The analyst frowned. "These conditions can't be right," they whispered. "Who could survive on a world like this?" The computer offered a label one the analyst hadn't seen in centuries. Classification: Type 7 Hostile Environment World, or, in a much older term that made the analyst's heart stutter, Deathworld. They stared at the word for a long moment. Their mind raced through rumors they'd heard across their long lifetime. Tales told around starport tables. Tales whispered by older travelers. Tales most people believed were exaggerated, if not completely false. Deathworlders, the stories, claimed were built differently. They didn't just survive dangerous environments, they adapted to them. Their bodies became tougher, their reflexes sharper, their immune systems stronger. They grew up expecting danger, and so they responded to danger with calm confidence. They didn't panic. They acted. But the analyst shook off the thought. It was probably a misreading, a glitch. The data didn't always translate smoothly from one biosphere to another. After all, no intelligent species could realistically evolve on a world like that. It was impossible. Still, a quiet unease settled. In their chest, the docking bay prepared to receive the guests. Crews cleaned the floors, arranged soft rugs, adjusted the oxygen mix, and set out refreshments considered polite in their culture. To them, hospitality was a universal language. Just before the visitors arrived, a diplomatic officer approached the viewing window and watched the small ship lock into place. "Whoever they are," the officer said gently, "we welcome them with open hearts. That is the Cathari way." No one disagreed. No one questioned it. But the older analyst couldn't shake a tiny chill crawling down their spine. They glanced at the screen again. The ship's interior readings showed bodies shaped for movement. Bodies trained over generations. Bodies adapted for surviving hardship. They felt a strange mix of fascination and worry. What if the old stories are true? They whispered to themselves. But the docking clamps clicked into place, and it was too late to question anything. The ship had arrived. The visitors were here. And inside the docking bay, the Cathari stood ready with warm smiles and gentle gestures, completely unaware that the arriving beings were not fragile explorers, not harmless wanderers, not guests in need of help. They were something the Cathari had never encountered before, something forged from storms, predators, and planets that tested life at every turn, something they were not prepared for, because the visitors were humans, creatures from a world the galaxy considered nearly impossible to survive. And the Cathari, in all their peaceful innocence, had absolutely no idea who they were welcoming. The Cathari had long studied the stars and the planets that dotted their region of space. But even after centuries of observation, there were always gaps in their knowledge. Some worlds had strange ecosystems. Some species were small and delicate. And some civilizations were just beginning to understand space travel. But among all the planets they had catalogued, few had the reputation of the human homeworld. Earth dotted first, many in the coalition dismissed the stories as exaggerations. Travelers often told tales of incredible creatures in extreme worlds. And the older stories sometimes became almost fairy tales. But Earth was different. Even the most casual readings of intercepted data suggested a world full of contradictions. Its surface teemed with life, Yet its environments could be harsh and unpredictable. Oceans could swallow entire coastlines in storms. Deserts baked creatures until only the strongest survived. And jungles were full of animals that could end a smaller species with a single bite. Yet somehow, humans had thrived. The analysts and scientists who reviewed the incoming ship now could not ignore the strange rumors. Their sensors had detected signals from humans before, but Earth had remained distant. They only had fragments of information, historical records, and hearsay passed from one explorer to another. The older texts described humans as terrifying in their endurance and unusually adaptable, but most people had never witnessed this firsthand. Many considered it an exaggeration, a legend of a species that simply survived against impossible odds. Still, the evidence in front of them made them pause. The human ship was small, far smaller than most other interstellar vessels they had encountered. It lacked the luxury and comfort that the Cathari considered standard. There were no sprawling living quarters, no extra compartments for leisure. It was bare, efficient, and practical. Everything about it suggested a species that valued survival and capability over comfort. One analyst studied the life sign readings again. "They are dense," they whispered. Their colleague raised a scale-patterned eyebrow. "Dense?" "Yes," the first analyst replied. "Their bodies are compact, but extremely strong. Heart rates are steady. Muscles, well, they are clearly built for endurance, for work, for danger." The room fell quiet. Nobody wanted to voice what they were all thinking. "I've read something like this before," another said slowly. "The old tailies call them Deathworlders. People who evolved on a planet that could kill them in 1,000 ways." "Deathworlders?" Someone echoed, skeptical. "You mean the legends? The stories no one takes seriously?" "Yes," the other said, voice low. "But what if the stories were true?" They all looked back at the ship. Its metal surface gleamed faintly under the docking lights, and small lights blinked along the hull. It seemed ordinary, harmless, but the analysts knew better than to judge only by appearances. The Cathari had learned long ago that appearances could deceive. What was small and quiet could hide strength. What seemed weak could survive disasters that would destroy larger beings. As the ship slowly moved into the docking bay, their scans showed more signs of life inside. Humans moved with surprising coordination. Even from this distance, the Cathari could detect subtle patterns of energy expenditure, subtle balance adjustments, and muscle tension that suggested a lifetime of physical challenges. Every movement seemed calculated, practiced, efficient. It's as if they've been trained all their lives to survive. One analyst whispered, barely able to hide awe. The older observer leaned back, eyes narrowing. "They have." That's exactly what the old reports meant. Humans grow up expecting danger. They learn to fight, to run, to adapt. Every step they take, every reaction they make, it is part of a long history of surviving the impossible. Some younger analysts looked confused. Impossible? They're just a species. They walk, they eat, they breathe. How is that impossible? The older observer shook their head. They survive where no one else could. Their world isn't safe. It never has been. Storms, predators, diseases, extreme temperatures. Their planet shapes them in ways most species can't even imagine. That's why they're so dangerous to underestimate. The younger analysts glanced nervously at the ship. It still looked so small, so unassuming. How could something that fit in a tiny bay be dangerous? The older observer let out a slow breath. Dangerous. Yes, but not in the way you think. They are dangerous because they are competent, calm, adaptable, unshakable. They don't panic. They survive, and when necessary, they act decisively. The group fell silent again, listening as the docking sequence completed. The ship's small hatches opened, releasing a soft hiss as the atmosphere adjusted. The humans inside began moving toward the doors. The Cathuri watched, their sensors detecting posture, movement, and breathing. Every detail seemed to confirm what they had feared. And yet, fascinatedly, what they had also hoped might be true. There? Ready, another analyst said. Yes. The older observer replied. They are always ready. That is their world, and that is their nature. Humans are survivors. As the first humans stepped onto the docking platform, the Cathari were struck by a strange combination of reactions. The visitors did not appear threatening in the sense of aggression. They did not carry massive weapons or display signs of immediate violence. But there was an aura of capability, of confidence, of quiet danger that the Cathari had never encountered before. The humans moved deliberately, carefully. They scanned their surroundings, noting exits, obstacles, and potential hazards. Their steps were steady, balanced, controlled. Every movement seemed deliberate, yet natural. It was almost mesmerizing. The diplomats and analysts could feel the tension in the room, even without being able to name it. Here were creatures that could easily survive challenges that would devastate a normal species. Creatures who could endure environmental hazards, biological threats, and unpredictable conditions with calm precision. Creatures who had already been tested by a world the Cathari could not imagine. One young observer whispered, I thought the stories were exaggerations. That's what we've always assumed. The older analysts shook their heads slowly. No, not exaggerations. They are survivors, built by a world that forces them to adapt. And now, they are here. The Cathari tried to prepare themselves for the meeting. The reception area was clean, calm, and perfectly arranged. The air was comfortable, the lighting soft, and everything designed to make a visitor feel at ease. The diplomats reminded themselves to stay polite, to stay welcoming, to stay in control. But even as they followed their protocols, a small unease lingered. They were not just meeting a new species. They were meeting a species that had survived the impossible. They were meeting a species that could, in an instant, adapt to any threat the Cathari might present. They were meeting humans, and humans had a reputation that even legends struggled to describe. The older observer turned back to the young analysts. Remember, they said, voice calm but serious, this is not about hostility. Humans are not here to attack. They are here to explore, to communicate, to survive. But they are also different. Their strength is not just physical. It is mental, emotional, instinctual. They will not panic, they will not break, and they will not underestimate any situation. That is what makes them dangerous, or formidable, depending on your perspective. The young analysts nodded, trying to absorb the warning. The idea that an ordinary-looking species could be so capable was difficult to grasp. Their history, their culture, their biology, everything about humans, defied the usual rules of the galaxy. Even the diplomats, who prided themselves on patience and control, felt the shift. The arrival of these small, ordinary-looking beings had changed the entire room. They were no longer just visitors. They were something extraordinary, something that demanded respect, something that would challenge assumptions about what a species could endure, survive, and achieve. And as the humans finally reached the edge of the docking bay, their faces calm, their eyes clear, their movements unhurried, the Cathari realized the truth. They were not meeting a fragile, delicate visitor in need of assistance. They were meeting a species that could survive almost anything, a species forged by a world that was as deadly as it was beautiful, a species whose stories had been told as myths, but were now unmistakably real. For the first time in centuries, the Cathari felt a mix of awe, curiosity, and a small, quiet fear. They were about to meet the legendary Deathworlders themselves. The moment the first humans stepped off their ship, the Cathari could not help but stare. The air in the docking bay felt heavier, not because of any sound or smell, but because of the presence of these newcomers. Every movement they made seemed measured, careful, and confident all at once. They did not rush. They did not stumble. They simply moved, aware of their surroundings, aware of the potential hazards, aware of the beings around them, but never distracted by them. From a distance, they looked ordinary, even small, compared to some of the larger species the Cathari had seen. Their bodies were slender in some ways, yet strong. Their muscles moved under the skin with ease and coordination. Nothing was wasted, nothing sloppy. Even their posture suggested they had faced difficulty all their lives and learned to overcome it. The diplomats had been trained to remain calm, to greet new species politely, and to maintain a controlled atmosphere. But as they stepped closer, their usual confidence faltered slightly. There was something about the humans that made them instinctively aware. These were beings used to danger, beings capable of handling situations most species would crumble under. The humans spoke first, and their voices were calm and clear. They did not shout, they did not demand attention, but there was a subtle weight to their words. Every sentence was delivered as though they understood the importance of every interaction. They smiled, but it was not the nervous smile of someone unsure. It was a smile that said they knew who they were, what they were capable of, and that they were not afraid. The Cathari diplomats returned their greetings cautiously, careful not to underestimate or misread the humans' intentions. They gestured with open palms, moved slowly to avoid startling them, and spoke softly to make sure nothing was misinterpreted. It was their way of saying, "We mean no harm." The humans noticed, and for a brief moment there was mutual observation. The Cathari tried to assess them, and the humans simply observed the station, the equipment, and the people with a quiet curiosity. There was no hostility, but there was an undeniable awareness in their eyes. It was as if they were reading the room, not just physically, but socially and emotionally. Every reaction, every subtle shift, was noted. One of the younger analysts whispered to a colleague, "It's like they can see everything at once." "That's impossible," the other replied softly, though they were not fully convinced. "No, species can be that aware." But the observation was not exaggeration. Humans had evolved on a world where danger was constant. Storms could strike without warning. Predators could attack at any moment. Even their own environment was a test of endurance and adaptability. Their senses, their instincts, their ability to read situations, all of it had been shaped by survival. They were not perfect, but they were remarkably capable, and that capability showed in every subtle gesture that the Cathari diplomats attempted to make conversation, asking questions about the humans' journey, their technology, their culture. The humans answered politely, but with precision. They did not fill the space with unnecessary words. Every answer conveyed information clearly, efficiently, and without pretension. It was different from any other species the Cathari had encountered. One diplomat asked, almost casually, "Your ship, it seems small for such a long journey. How do you manage with so little space?" A human stepped forward, glanced at the questioner with calm eyes, and replied with a slight smile, "We don't need more than we use. Efficiency is a skill we learn early." It was not arrogance. It was matter-of-fact honesty. The answer made the diplomats pause. Most species would have added elaborate explanations or excuses. Humans simply explained, and the explanation carried weight. They spoke as though they had lived every word, and in a way, they had. Their lives, their planet, their challenges, all of it, had taught them how to survive with exactly what they had got as the humans moved further into the station. The Cathari noticed something else. the way they adapted to the environment. Gravity, temperature, the subtle pressure changes inside the docking bay, all of it would unsettle most species. But the humans adjusted instinctively. They walked smoothly, balancing as though every step had been practiced for conditions far worse than this. They handled minor obstacles effortlessly, stepping over cables, navigating tight corners, and adjusting to sudden movements without hesitation. The observers in the back watched in quiet awe. One whispered, "They don't just survive. They move like they own every situation, like danger has already taught them how to handle it." And in a sense, they had. Humans had grown up on a planet that forced them to adapt constantly. They had faced harsh climates, extreme storms, dangerous wildlife, and unpredictable events. Each challenge had shaped them into beings who could assess situations quickly, respond effectively, and maintain calm in the face of chaos. It was not just their physical presence that impressed the Cathari. It was their confidence, their clarity, OF thought, and their composure. In a species that had grown accustomed to comfort, luxury, and careful planning, humans were a stark contrast. They were raw, practical, and yet deeply intelligent. They were survivors in a way that could not be learned. It had been earned through generations of hardship and adaptation. One of the Cathari analysts noticed something else as they observed the humans closely. Their eyes were constantly scanning, taking in details that most species would overlook. They seemed aware of every movement, every subtle shift in light, sound, and pressure. It was not paranoia. It was trained observation, honed instinct, and natural awareness. They're like predators without being aggressive. The analyst whispered. "Yes," replied the older observer. "They can handle danger, and they know how to avoid unnecessary conflict. That is what makes them formidable. Not because they attack first, but because they survive everything." The diplomats tried to keep the meeting formal, but the tension in the air was palpable. The humans' presence alone altered the atmosphere. It was not threatening in the traditional sense. There was no weapon drawn, no hostile gesture. Yet, everyone in the room instinctively felt that these beings were not to be underestimated. A human approached a Cathari engineer who had been quietly observing from the side. Instead of asking for guidance, the human examined the equipment on their own, handling it with care but also with an ease that suggested experience. The engineer watched, heart racing slightly. Every movement was deliberate, every touch measured. This was not casual curiosity. This was understanding and competence in action. The engineer finally spoke, a little nervously. You seem very comfortable handling that." The human looked up and smiled. "We learn to adapt. Environments are never perfect. We make do." It was simple, almost understated, but it carried the weight of experience. The humans did not brag. They did not flaunt their abilities. They simply demonstrated them. Every action confirmed what the old stories had said. Humans were survivors, shaped by a world that demanded resilience, intelligence, and adaptability. The diplomats continued the conversation, cautiously asking about the humans' journey, their understanding of space, and their intentions. The humans answered with patience, clarity, and calm. There was no hesitation, no confusion. Even when asked difficult questions about their ship or the journey, they responded with clear explanations, demonstrating practical knowledge and situational awareness that impressed everyone in the room. It became increasingly clear to the Cathari that this meeting was unlike any they had experienced. They were not merely encountering a new species. They were encountering a species that carried the weight of their homeworld's challenges in every action, every word, and every glance. As the humans settled into the room, the Cathari began to understand something fundamental. These were not fragile explorers or naive travelers. These were capable, resilient, and adaptive beings. They could survive what other species could not. They could think quickly, respond to danger instinctively, and endure hardships that would break others. They were humans, creatures shaped by a planet that taught them to survive, adapt, and endure. And in that moment, the Cathari realized something else. They were witnessing something rare, something extraordinary, something that could change the way they viewed life in the galaxy forever. Humans were not just visitors, they were survivors. They were examples of endurance and adaptability. And they were here now, on the Cathari station, quietly demonstrating their capabilities without ever needing to prove themselves. The diplomats and analysts exchanged glances, a mix of awe and caution in their expressions. They had expected visitors, but they had not expected this. They had expected diplomacy, perhaps curiosity, but not the presence of a species that carried the resilience of an entire planet in their very beings. And as the humans moved further into the station, exploring, observing, and interacting, it became clear that the Cathari were witnessing the arrival of a species whose legend was real, a species that had survived impossible conditions, had adapted, and had now arrived to meet them in the calmest, most controlled way possible. The room was quiet, but it was not tense. It was filled with a deep sense of awareness. Humans were here, and the Cathari understood, even if only instinctively at first, that they were in the presence of something remarkable, something that had endured, adapted, and survived, something that the galaxy had long whispered about in stories, and this was only the beginning. The humans had barely begun to explore the Cathari station when something unexpected happened. One of the storage crates, stacked slightly higher than usual, began to wobble. A slight tremor ran through the platform, nothing major, but enough to disturb the balance of the crate. The Cathari staff immediately noticed and rushed forward, trying to stabilize it, but before anyone could react fully, the crate tipped and began to fall toward the edge of the platform. The noise of metal scraping against the floor echoed through the docking bay. Some of the younger Cathari jumped back in panic, unsure how to react. Others froze, worried about the possibility of damage or worse, injury. The humans, however, moved without hesitation. One stepped forward, hand outstretched, and caught the crate with surprising ease. There was no struggle, no flailing, just calm, deliberate force. The crate, which would have crushed anything in its path, was stopped effortlessly, held steady, as though it weighed far less than it actually did. The Cathari froze. They had been trained to respond quickly, but they had never seen anything like this. The humans simply adjusted their stance, knees slightly bent, hands steady, and shifted the crate back onto a safe part of the floor. It was almost casual, like moving a light bundle. Yet the crate must have weighed hundreds of kilograms. Not another human moved to help, assessing the environment in a glance. They noticed a loose panel on the platform that could pose a hazard if it left unchecked. Without waiting for instructions, they bent down, lifted the panel carefully, and placed it in a safe corner. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, and efficient. There was no wasted motion. The Cathari observers whispered among themselves. "How can they be so strong?" one asked quietly. "It's impossible." "Not impossible," the older analyst replied. "Just different. They grow up like this. Their world forces them to develop strength, agility, and instinct together. They are prepared for situations we would never even imagine." Then another incident occurred. A small fire erupted near one of the machinery sections. It was not large, but sparks flew, smoke began to rise, and the Cathari staff panicked. The humans reacted instantly. One grabbed a nearby extinguisher, moving to the fire while another human assessed the situation for any structural hazards. They worked in silence, calm and precise. Within moments, the fire was contained. The smoke dissipated, and the equipment was unharmed. The Cathari staff, still recovering from the initial shock, watched the humans as if seeing them for the first time. They had handled the situation with efficiency, focus, and zero panic. In an environment where even small accidents could escalate, the humans seemed almost untouchable. A younger Cathari approached, still wide-eyed. "I don't understand. How can you react so quickly without fear?" The human looked up, expression calm but warm. "Fear doesn't disappear," they said. "We just don't let it control us. You assess, you act, you adapt. Panic doesn't help anyone." It was simple advice, but it carried the weight of experience. Humans had learned to face dangers from the moment they could walk. Storms, predators, injuries, unpredictable environments. They had survived all of it. Their ability to stay calm, think clearly, and act effectively was built into them by their world and their upbringing. As the humans continued moving through the station, they noticed another hazard, a small breach in the hull seal near the maintenance bay. The Cathari had been planning to repair it later, but the humans identified it immediately. Without waiting for instructions, one human grabbed a toolkit, assessed the pressure difference, and sealed the breach using both technology and quick improvisation. The seal held, restoring normal conditions almost instantly. The Cathari staff could hardly believe their eyes. They had spent hours training for emergencies, yet these humans handled multiple incidents at once with ease, skill, and calm confidence. It was clear that this was not luck. This was instinct honed by experience and survival. Meanwhile, the humans also observed the Cathari procedures. They did not criticize, but they noted inefficiencies and potential hazards. Then subtly, without arrogance, they adjusted minor processes to make the environment safer. Equipment was shifted slightly, cables secured, loose items checked. Every action was precise, thoughtful, and effective. One of the engineers, still in shock, muttered, "They make it all look so easy." The human nearby smiled faintly. "We've had to make it look easy for our own survival," they said simply. The room fell silent as everyone processed the calm efficiency of the humans. These were beings who could survive extremes, respond to emergencies instantly, and make critical decisions under pressure. And yet, there was no show of power, no desire to dominate, no attempt to intimidate. Everything they did was practical, deliberate, and grounded in necessity. Another minor accident occurred. A piece of equipment began to fall from a higher shelf. Before it could tip completely, one human dashed forward, caught it, and adjusted it safely. They moved back to their position, as if nothing had happened. The Cathari staff realized that these humans did not operate on reflex alone. They were trained, conditioned, and aware in a way that allowed them to anticipate danger before it even became real. The older analyst looked around the room, eyes wide with awe. "This is what the legends meant," they whispered. "Humans are survivors, not because they fight everything, but because they are prepared for everything. Danger is second nature to them." A diplomat stepped closer, still cautious. "You're calm? Your ability to handle accidents without panic. It's extraordinary. How do you do it?" The human paused, thinking carefully. "We practice. We face danger, learn from it, and adapt. Fear is natural, but we don't let it decide our actions. We move, we fix, we survive. That's what matters." The Cathari realized that this was not arrogance, but honesty. Humans had lived lives shaped by unpredictability, and they carried that experience everywhere they went. Their strength was not just physical. It was mental, emotional, and instinctive. It was a product of their planet, their history, and their choices. As the humans continued moving through the station, handling minor emergencies and adjusting processes, the Cathari began to understand something fundamental. These beings were different, They were not fragile. They were not helpless. They were capable, confident, and prepared for challenges that would overwhelm most species. It became clear that the humans' arrival was not just a visit. It was a demonstration of survival, adaptability, and intelligence. Every small action, every calm response to potential danger revealed the truth of their legend. The Cathari had heard stories of humans, but seeing it firsthand was entirely different. By the time the initial chaos had settled, the Cathari staff were no longer panicked. They were in awe. They realized that these humans had not come to conquer, nor to harm, nor even to impress. They had come simply to be themselves, capable, aware, and prepared. And in doing so, they had quietly reshaped the way everyone in the station thought about survival and strength. The older analyst took a deep breath and said softly, "We have underestimated them for far too long. The humans, they are something else, something we have never seen before." And the humans, still moving calmly through the docking bay, continued to observe, adapt, and handle every small challenge with quiet efficiency. They were survivors. And the Cathari now understood that their legend was real, not exaggerated, not myth, but truth. In that moment, the station was no longer just a safe space for visitors. It had become a place where the Cathari could witness, firsthand, the extraordinary capabilities of a species forged by a world that demanded endurance, resilience, and intelligence at every turn. And the humans had only just begun. The Cathari council had gathered in the central chamber, a circular room with walls that glowed softly and displayed the patterns of distant stars. Normally, meetings like this were calm and orderly, full of discussion about trade, exploration, or minor territorial disputes. But today, the air was tense, almost electric. The arrival of the humans had changed everything. The council members were uneasy. They had always prided themselves on diplomacy, on reason, on understanding. But these humans, they were something different, something extraordinary. The reports from the docking bay, from the analysts, described incidents that sounded unbelievable. Humans had caught falling crates as if they weighed nothing. They had sealed breaches, handled fires, and adjusted complicated machinery in moments, all with calm and confidence. And they had done it without a hint of panic. One council member spoke first, their voice low and cautious. "We have always considered ourselves a peaceful species, the scholars of the galaxy, masters of diplomacy and intelligence. Yet these beings, they seem prepared for everything. They are not aggressive, but they are formidable." Another nodded, their expression serious. Formidable is the right word. The legends were true. The humans are Deathworlders. They survive, they adapt, and they endure where most would fail. We cannot underestimate them. A third member, younger and less experienced, asked nervously, "But they have not shown hostility. Why are we concerned?" The older member looked at them carefully. "Because their strength is not in aggression. Their strength is in survival. That is more dangerous than hostility, because it cannot be predicted. We can plan for aggression, but survival? We can only respect it and hope we can understand it before it is too late." The council debated quietly, weighing what to do. They realized they had to approach the humans differently than they approached any other species. These were beings who had lived and grown in danger, who had faced extreme challenges from birth, and who had survived them. Every move they made was calculated, efficient, and precise. They were strong, capable, and unshakable. After a long pause, the council agreed. The humans would be approached with caution, but also with respect. This was not a species to test or challenge. They were a species to observe, to learn from, and to welcome carefully. Meanwhile, in the docking bay, the humans continued to move calmly. They had noticed the council's attention. The way the Cathari observers shifted nervously whenever they spoke or acted. But the humans did not react with alarm. They simply continued their work, answering questions, observing equipment, and interacting with the environment naturally. When a delegation of Cathari council members arrived, the humans stopped briefly and greeted them politely. There was no stiff formality, no exaggerated gestures. They spoke with calm clarity, making the council feel seen and acknowledged without trying to impress or intimidate. One council member, still cautious, asked, "Your arrival was unexpected. Why have you come to our sector?" The human responded, "Evenly, we come seeking knowledge and cooperation. We do not intend harm, nor do we seek control. We are explorers, and we believe in understanding other species as much as being understood ourselves." The Cathari exchanged glances. The words were simple, but the tone carried authority and confidence. There was no arrogance, but there was also no uncertainty. The council realized that these humans were capable of holding themselves with composure and clarity, regardless of the situation. Another member asked, "Your species, your abilities, they are unlike anything we have encountered. How do you manage such strength and calm under pressure?" The human considered this carefully. "We grow up facing challenges that others do not. We learn quickly that panic solves nothing. We adapt, we assess, we act. Our world teaches us these skills, and we carry them with us wherever we go." The council members nodded, though some looked uneasy. They had heard stories of humans surviving impossible conditions, but now they were seeing evidence. Humans could handle chaos, danger, and unexpected events with skill and calm. It was unlike anything the Cathari had experienced firsthand. A young analyst whispered to an older colleague, "They make it look effortless." The older analyst shook their head. "It's not effortless. It's trained by necessity. They have learned what most species never will. That is what makes them extraordinary." One council member, still skeptical, asked cautiously, "And yet you are peaceful in your approach to us. Why? You could dominate this station if you wished." The human smiled faintly, calm and steady. "Power without purpose is wasted. Strength is not always about domination. Sometimes it is about understanding, cooperation, and survival. We act where it matters, but we do not act without reason." The council realized that the human strength was not just physical. It was mental and emotional. They were capable of action, yes, but they also understood diplomacy, reasoning, and restraint. Their survival instincts did not lead them to recklessness. They led them to awareness, adaptability, and careful judgment. As the meeting continued, the humans engaged in discussion about potential collaboration, sharing knowledge about space navigation, technology, and survival strategies. They were careful to respect the Cathari's culture, their systems, and their way of life. Every suggestion they made was practical, useful, and non-intrusive. They did not try to impose their ideas, but rather offered them as possibilities. Cathari Council began to relax, sensing that the humans were not a threat. But they also understood why they were regarded with both awe and caution. These beings were capable of surviving and thriving in situations that would destroy most other species. Their calm confidence, their clear thinking, and their ability to handle emergencies made them formidable allies or formidable opponents. If challenged, the council paused to observe as one human moved through the chamber, noting structural details, energy flows, and safety measures. They did not make judgments, only observations. Then another human adjusted a minor procedure, improving efficiency without disrupting the system. Every action was precise, deliberate, and quietly powerful. One council member leaned toward another and whispered, "We have underestimated them. We should have prepared differently. These humans, they are not what we expected." The other nodded. No, they are beyond expectation. We need to respect them, learn from them, and perhaps even rely on them for guidance in ways we have not considered. The humans concluded the meeting by thanking the council for their hospitality and expressing their willingness to cooperate. Their tone was calm, sincere, and confident. The council members could not help but feel respect and a touch of awe. As the humans left the chamber, the Cathari Council remained silent for a moment. They realized that they had encountered something rare, a species that combined survival instincts, intelligence, adaptability, and diplomacy in a way they had never seen before. The older analyst finally spoke, breaking the quiet. They are not just survivors. They are teachers. If we pay attention, we can learn from them, not just about survival, but about how to approach the unknown, how to respond under pressure, and how to think clearly when everything is uncertain. The council members nodded. They understood that the humans' abilities were not meant to intimidate, but to demonstrate what was possible. These beings had faced impossible conditions, adapted, survived, and now they had arrived in the Cathari sector with calm confidence and a willingness to cooperate. It became clear that humans were not just a new species in the galaxy. They were a new standard, a living example of resilience, intelligence, and balance. They could survive disasters, adapt to danger, and maintain composure in every situation. And perhaps most importantly, they could do so while remaining peaceful, diplomatic, and respectful. The Cathari Council realized that the galaxy had changed in subtle but profound ways. The arrival of humans was not a threat in itself, but it was a challenge to their assumptions, their expectations, and their understanding of what life in the universe could be. And as they watched the humans move through the station, calm, efficient, and aware, they understood that this meeting was only the beginning. The humans had arrived, and with them came not just survival, but knowledge, cooperation, and a quiet strength that would leave a lasting impression on every species they encountered. The council members exchanged looks of understanding, and for the first time, perhaps a little humility. They had met the legendary Deathworlders, and they realized that the galaxy had never known anything quite like them. Humans were here. Humans were capable. Humans were extraordinary. And the Cathari would never underestimate them again. The days following the humans' arrival on the Cathari station were filled with cautious observation, quiet discussions, and a growing sense of awe. The Cathari had always prided themselves on their diplomacy and intelligence, yet these humans challenged every expectation. They were calm, capable, and capable of adapting to anything that came their way. Every moment spent in their presence was a lesson in patience, awareness, and quiet strength. A council gathered again, this time not to debate strategy, but to decide how to engage with these extraordinary visitors. The earlier meetings had revealed more than just the humans. Calm and intelligence. They had demonstrated an almost unparalleled ability to handle danger, assess risk, and act decisively. The Cathari realized that these qualities were not learned overnight. They had been honed over generations, forged by a world far harsher than any the coalition had ever encountered. One council member spoke first, their voice low but resolute. We have underestimated them. We assumed fragility, we assumed dependence, and we assumed that their legend was exaggerated. Now we see that they are something more, something rare. Another nodded. Yes, their abilities are not just physical. They are mental, emotional, instinctual. They survive challenges that would overwhelm most species, and they do so calmly, thoughtfully, and without arrogance. A third member added, we must approach them not as visitors, but as potential allies and perhaps as teachers. Their skills, their instincts, their understanding of survival, we can learn from them. And in doing so, we can strengthen our own position in the galaxy. Meanwhile, The humans moved freely through the station, interacting with engineers, analysts, and even the youngest Cathari apprentices. They did not lecture or demand attention. They observed, suggested improvements, and sometimes quietly assisted when something seemed unsafe. Their presence alone changed the atmosphere. The station, once orderly and cautious, now seemed energized. By competence, calm, and awareness, the Cathari quickly learned that humans approached problems differently. Where they might have carefully analyzed a situation over hours, the humans assessed in minutes, often predicting outcomes before the full scenario unfolded. They moved with confidence, but never recklessly. They acted decisively, yet with consideration. And they did all of this with a humility that was almost alien to the Cathari, who were used to formal hierarchies and carefully measured responses. One day, an unexpected minor accident occurred during a routine maintenance check. A section of the outer hull had a small tear, allowing air to escape slowly. In most cases, this would have caused panic, a flurry of activity, and emergency protocols that might have slowed repairs. The humans, however, reacted instantly. One, humans secured the area. Another reinforced the damaged panel using tools and materials at hand, while the third monitored environmental controls to ensure stability. Within moments, the breach was sealed, the pressure restored, and no one was harmed. The Cathari astounded. Even after witnessing humans handle falling crates, fires, and equipment failures, this display of calm, coordinated efficiency left them speechless. It was not strength alone that impressed them, but composure, adaptability, and teamwork under pressure. A young analyst whispered to an older colleague, "They don't just survive. They improve the situation while surviving." The older colleague nodded, and they do it without showing off. That is the real lesson. As days passed, the humans and the Cathari began to collaborate in ways that had been impossible before. They shared knowledge of technology, navigation, environmental systems, and survival techniques. The humans offered insights into dealing with unpredictable conditions, teaching the Cathari how to adapt procedures to changing circumstances. The Cathari, in turn, offered guidance on their own advanced systems, diplomacy, and ways to approach other species in the galaxy. The humans' approach to cooperation impressed the Council most of all. They never demanded authority, never claimed superiority, and never sought credit. They acted as equals, listening carefully, adjusting suggestions when necessary, and ensuring that everyone understood the reasoning behind each decision. Their calm confidence inspired respect, trust, and even admiration. By the end of the first week, it became clear that the humans were more than visitors. They were partners in learning and adaptation. Their presence had transformed the station's operations, increased efficiency, and even reduced risk in ways the Cathari had not imagined possible. The Council realized that forming an alliance with these beings was not only beneficial, but also necessary for future exploration and security. The final Council meeting with the humans was different from the first. There was no fear, no hesitation, only mutual respect. The Cathari spoke openly about their admiration for the human skills, their endurance, and their calm under pressure. They acknowledged that humans had far surpassed anything the Coalition had expected or prepared for. One council member said, "You have shown us a new way of approaching challenges. Your presence has taught us not only about survival, but about awareness, adaptability, and composure. We are grateful for your cooperation and for the lessons you have shared." A human responded simply, calmly, and sincerely, "We are glad to share what we know. Survival and cooperation go hand in hand. Strength is valuable, but understanding and adaptation are what ensure that strength is used wisely. We are here to learn, to share, and to build trust." Another council member added, "Your species has endured more than any other we know. Yet you act with humility, patience, and respect. That is rare. That is extraordinary. The humans smiled faintly, accepting the praise without arrogance. Their calm, quiet demeanor reinforced the lesson that Cathari had learned over the past days. True strength was not shown by force, but by competence, composure, and the ability to act wisely when it mattered most. The council deliberated briefly and then made a historic decision. They would form a defensive and cooperative alliance with the humans. This was not a simple gesture of diplomacy. It was a recognition of capability, respect, and mutual benefit. The humans' presence promised increased safety, new knowledge, and the potential for exploration far beyond what the Cathari could have achieved alone. When the alliance was announced, the humans responded with humility. They did not demand recognition, control, or leadership. They simply confirmed their commitment to cooperation, trust, and mutual learning. The Cathari, in turn, felt a sense of relief and pride. They had not only met a legendary species, but had formed a lasting relationship with them. In the days that followed, the humans and the Cathari continued to work together. The humans assisted in training protocols, emergency drills, and strategic planning. Their lessons were practical, grounded in experience, and always focused on adaptation and resilience. The Cathari learned to observe more carefully, anticipate challenges, and respond with efficiency and calm skills they had admired in the humans. The humans also explored other sections of the station, quietly learning about Cathari technology, communication systems, and social structures. They asked questions, observed patterns, and offered gentle suggestions where improvements were possible. Nothing they did was forceful or disruptive. Everything they did enhanced understanding and trust. By the end of their stay, it was clear to everyone on the station that the humans had changed the Cathari perspective forever. They had arrived as visitors, but they left as partners, teachers, and a benchmark for capability and resilience. The legend of humans as Deathworlders was no longer a story, it was a reality, witnessed firsthand. The council held a final gathering to reflect on the humans' impact. Members spoke openly about the lessons learned: awareness, calm under pressure, adaptability, teamwork, and the importance of observing and learning from others. They recognized that humans had not come to dominate or intimidate. They had come to cooperate, survive, and teach through action rather than words. One member concluded, "We have been given a rare opportunity to meet a species that has endured the impossible, that survives with calm confidence, and that acts with wisdom and cooperation." Humans are not only allies, they are examples of what is possible when resilience, intelligence, and respect are combined. The humans listened, acknowledging the words without pride or boast. Their mission had never been to prove superiority, but to act as equals, to build trust, and to share the lessons of survival, adaptation, and calm under pressure. As the humans prepared to depart, the Cathari staff and council members gathered to see them off. There was no fanfare, no elaborate ceremony, only genuine respect, gratitude, and admiration. The humans had arrived quietly, handled every challenge with competence, and left an impression that would last for generations. The humans' ship lifted off, small and unassuming, yet carrying a presence that had forever changed the Cathari perception of life, survival, and resilience. The legends had been true. The stories had underestimated them, but now the Cathari knew the reality. Humans were extraordinary. They were calm in chaos, strong in adversity, and wise in action. They were survivors, teachers, and partners. And as the stars stretched out before the departing ship, the Cathari realized that the galaxy had just opened a new chapter, one where humans, forged by impossible worlds, would leave their mark through cooperation, endurance, and quiet strength. The galaxy had never known anything quite like them, and they Cathari would never forget the lessons they had learned. Humans had arrived. Humans had survived. Humans had taught. And the universe would never be the same.